She was falling. Wind tore through her hair. Her shoulders slammed against rock. The smell hit her first wet earth. Decay. And something else. Something alive. Emma Collins landed face down in the darkness, pain exploding through her ribs. Above her, Kyle's laughter echoed down the mouth of the cave. Sweet dreams, Emma. Then footsteps, fading, gone. She tried to move, couldn't. Her wrists were still bound behind her back. That's when she heard it. A growl, low, guttural, not one voice, many. Her eyes adjusted to the blackness. Yellow eyes emerged from the shadows. 1 pair, 3, 6, moving closer. Wolves. She was in their den. The largest one stepped forward, silver-gray fur, white chest, black spine, one eye clouded white from an old wound. It stood close enough for her to feel its breath on her face. It opened its jaws. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, but instead of teeth tearing flesh, she heard something else, a soft whine, almost like recognition. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The wolf's hot breath washed over her face, damp, heavy, carrying the iron scent of old blood. This is it. This is how I die. She waited for the pain, the tearing, the end. Nothing came. 1 second. 2, 5. Slowly, against every screaming instinct, Emma opened her eyes. The massive wolf hadn't moved. It stood frozen, nose inches from her face, nostrils flaring as it inhaled her scent. Its one good eye, amber, ancient, unreadable, studied her with an intensity that felt almost human. Behind it, the other wolves paced, growling, hungry. One young male lunged forward. The alpha spun and snarled a sound so deep and violent that Emma felt it vibrate through the cave floor. The young wolf retreated immediately, tail tucked, head low. The alpha turned back to Emma. It leaned closer, sniffed her hair, her neck, her bound hands, each breath deliberate, searching. Emma trembled uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her dirt-caked cheeks. She didn't understand. Wolves didn't hesitate. Wolves killed. Why wasn't she dead? The alpha tilted its head. Moonlight filtering through the cave entrance caught something around its neck, a strip of fabric, weathered and frayed, wrapped tight against the gray fur. Emma's breath caught. No. The fabric was faded now, barely holding together. But she knew that pattern. Knew it like she knew her own heartbeat, pink and white stripes, tiny flowers along the edge, her hospital bracelet, the one they'd put on her wrist the day she was born. The only proof she'd ever existed to anyone. She'd worn it for 8 years through 12 foster homes, through beatings, through nights of wondering why no one wanted her. And she'd left it here, in this cave, 12 years ago. Her lips moved before her brain caught up. Shadow. The wolf's ear twitched. It went completely still. Then it did something that made Emma forget how to breathe. The massive alpha killer of elk, leader of the pack, terror of the Montana wilderness, lowered itself to the ground, pressed its body against hers, and rested its great head in her lap. A sound escaped its throat. Not a growl, not a warning. A whimper, like a creature that had waited 12 years for this moment. Emma didn't move. She couldn't. The wolf's massive head lay heavy in her lap, its warmth seeping through her torn jeans. Around them, the pack had settled, some lying down, others watching from the shadows. No more growling, No more circling, as if an order had been given. Shadow's breathing was slow and steady against her thigh. Emma's bound hands ached behind her back, but she barely noticed. Her mind was 12 years away, drowning in memories she'd spent a lifetime trying to bury. She'd been 8 years old, 47 pounds, covered in bruises she'd learned to hide. The Petersons had been her 6th foster family. Dave Peterson liked whiskey. He liked silence even more. Emma had learned quickly that existing too loudly earned consequences: a backhand across the mouth, a belt across the shoulders. Once a cigarette pressed into her forearm while his wife pretended not to hear the screaming from the kitchen. That night, the night everything changed, Emma had spilled a glass of milk. Such a small thing. Such a stupid, small thing. Dave's eyes had gone dark. He'd unbuckled his belt with practiced ease, but something in Emma had finally snapped. 8 years of being unwanted. 8 years of wondering what was so wrong with her that her own mother had left her on a hospital doorstep like garbage. She'd run. Out the back door, across the yard, into the Montana wilderness that stretched endless and black behind the Peterson property. She'd run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. Run until the trees swallowed her whole and the stars above were the only witnesses to her escape. She'd been lost for 2 days. No food, no water. Just endless forest and the growing certainty that she would die out here, and no one would even notice. On the second night, she'd collapsed beside a stream, too weak to take another step. The cold had seeped into her bones. Her eyes had fluttered closed, and then warmth. Something soft pressed against her back. Hot breath on her neck. Emma had been too exhausted to scream, too broken to care if death had finally come for her. But when she'd forced her eyes open at dawn, she hadn't found death. She'd found a wolf, a female. Gray fur streaked with silver, watching her with eyes that held no hunger, only something that looked almost like recognition, like purpose. The wolf had gripped Emma's torn jacket in her jaws and dragged her gently, impossibly gently, through the forest, into a cave hidden beneath an outcrop of ancient stone. Inside, it was warm, dry, safe, and there was a pup. Tiny, no more than a few months old, with fur the color of storm clouds and a white patch on his chest like spilled milk. He'd stumbled toward Emma on clumsy legs, sniffing her face, her hands, her tangled hair. When she'd reached out to touch him, he hadn't flinched. He'd licked her fingers. For 3 days. Emma had lived in that cave. The mother wolf brought her food rabbits, once a chunk of deer meat still warm with fading life. Emma had eaten it raw, too hungry for disgust. At night, the mother wolf curled around her, and the pup nestled against her chest. And for the first time in her 8 years of existence, Emma had felt something she couldn't name. Later, she would learn the word belonging. She'd named the pup Shadow because he followed her everywhere. When she explored the cave, he was at her heels. When she sat by the entrance watching the forest, he pressed against her side. When she cried, and she cried often, though she didn't fully understand why he would lick the tears from her cheeks as if trying to taste her sadness. On the 3rd day, they came. Search and rescue. Helicopters, dogs, voices shouting her name like it mattered. The mother wolf had heard them first. She'd stood at the cave entrance, hackles raised, placing herself between Emma and the approaching sounds. Shadow had whimpered, pressing closer to Emma's leg. Emma had known. With the certainty of a child who'd learned that good things never lasted, that this was the end. They would take her back. Back to Dave Peterson. Back to the belt and the cigarettes and the silence that screamed louder than words. She'd knelt beside Shadow, tears streaming down her face. The pup had looked at her with those amber eyes, confused, trusting, heartbreakingly innocent. Emma had unclasped her hospital bracelet. The fabric was worn soft from 8 years against her skin. The little flowers faded but still visible. It was all she had. The only proof that she'd once been born to someone. Even if that someone hadn't wanted to keep her. She'd tied it around Shadow's neck. "So you won't forget me," she'd whispered. The rescue team had found her minutes later. A woman had wrapped her in a blanket, murmuring words meant to comfort. A man had carried her to the helicopter. Emma had looked back only once. Shadow had stood at the cave entrance, watching her go. He'd howled. She'd never forgotten that sound. Now, 12 years later, Emma lay in the same cave, bound and bruised and thrown away like trash again, and that same howl echoed in her memory. She looked down at the wolf in her lap, at the faded bracelet still wrapped around his neck. He'd kept it, all this time. He'd kept it. "You remembered," she breathed. "You actually remembered." Shadow's tail moved once, a slow, heavy thump against the cave floor. Around them, the pack had fully settled. A female wolf approached cautiously, something dangling from her jaws. She dropped it in front of Emma, a rabbit, freshly killed, offering acceptance. Emma thought of the Harrison farm, of Margaret, who brushed her hair and called her sweetheart, of Rachel, who shared secrets and dreams and the kind of sisterhood Emma had only read about in books, of Walter, who had seemed so kind, so safe, and of Kyle, whose hatred had burned in his eyes from the moment she'd arrived. She'd thought, foolishly, that she'd finally found home. Now she was back where she started, in a cave, with wolves. Maybe that was where she'd belonged all along. Emma let her head fall back against the stone wall. Exhaustion pulled at her, the terror of the night finally catching up. Shadow's warmth was a steady comfort against the cold. She was almost asleep when a thought struck her, sharp and sudden. The mother wolf. Shadow's mother, the one who had saved her, fed her, kept her alive. Emma had always assumed she'd died. Wolves in the wild rarely lived past 8 or 10 years. That wolf would be ancient now, certainly gone. But something nagged at her, a detail she couldn't place. Shadow was the alpha now. The pack was his. But alphas didn't rule alone. There was always a structure, always elders. Emma's eyes snapped open. Shadow lifted his head. Alert! Outside the cave. A new sound rose through the darkness, not the pack. Something else, something distant and hollow and achingly familiar. A howl, but this one was different. Weaker, broken. Not a call of the wild, a cry for help. Shadow was on his feet instantly, ears pricked, body rigid. He looked toward the cave entrance, then back at Emma. And in that look, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Recognition. And grief. Emma's voice came out barely a whisper. "She's still alive. Isn't she your mother? She's still out there." Shadow didn't move, but somewhere in the distance, the broken howl came again. And this time, it sounded almost like a scream. The night passed in fragments. Emma drifted between sleep and waking, her body too exhausted to stay alert, her mind too frightened to fully rest. Each time she stirred, Shadow was there pressed against her side, his warmth a barrier against the cave's creeping cold. His one good eye would find hers in the darkness, steady and watchful, and something in Emma's chest would loosen just enough to let her breathe. The other wolves kept their distance, respectful, waiting. Around 3 a.m, a young female approached. She was smaller than the others, her coat a patchwork of gray and white, and she moved with the tentative curiosity of an adolescent still learning the pack's rules. She sniffed Emma's bound hands, her torn jacket, the dried blood on her temple where she'd struck the rock during her fall. Shadow lifted his head. A low rumble built in his throat, not aggressive, but firm. A warning. The young female retreated immediately, but not before dropping something at Emma's feet. A strip of dried meat, deer, maybe, or elk. An offering. Emma stared at it, tears burning behind her eyes. These creatures, these so-called monsters that Kyle had used as instruments of her murder, were feeding her, protecting her, accepting her as one of their own. She thought about the Harrison farm, about the 2 years she'd spent there, slowly letting herself believe that maybe, finally, she'd found a place to stay. Margaret had been the first to make her feel welcome. A soft-spoken woman with prematurely gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She'd shown Emma to her room on that first day and said, "This is yours now, for as long as you want it." Such simple words. But Emma had replayed them in her head for weeks, testing them for hidden meanings, waiting for the catch. The catch had never come. Margaret braided her hair on Sunday mornings, taught her to make apple pie from scratch, held her without asking questions on the nights when Emma woke up screaming from dreams she couldn't remember. Walter had been quieter in his kindness. He'd taught Emma to drive the old pickup truck, patient even when she stalled it 6 times in a row. He'd left books on her nightstand, adventure stories, mysteries, once a worn copy of Little Women, with a note tucked inside, Margaret's favorite, thought you might like it too. And Rachel, sweet, fierce Rachel, who'd declared Emma her sister within the first month and meant it, who shared her clothes and her secrets and her dreams of leaving Montana for somewhere bigger, brighter, full of possibility. "We'll go together," she'd promised. "You and me. Sisters don't leave each other behind." Emma had let herself believe. Stupid. So stupid. Because there had always been Kyle. Kyle, with his cold gray eyes and his easy cruelty. Kyle, who looked at Emma like she was dirt tracked in on someone's shoe. Kyle, who had cornered her in the barn 3 months ago and whispered, "You don't belong here. You'll never belong anywhere. And one day, everyone's going to see that." She should have known. The signs had been there, the way Walter's face tightened whenever Kyle entered a room. The arguments behind closed doors that stopped abruptly when Emma walked past. Margaret's forced smiles. Rachel's worried glances. The tension that hummed beneath the surface of every family dinner. But Emma had wanted so badly to belong that she'd ignored it all. Now she was paying the price. The first gray light of dawn crept into the cave around 5:30. Emma had finally dozed off, her head resting against Shadow's flank, when a sound jolted her awake. Helicopter blades. Her heart lurched. She scrambled upright, wincing at the pain in her ribs, her bound hands making every movement clumsy and awkward. The sound grew louder, closer, Then voices, faint but unmistakable, filtering through the trees. Emma Collins. Hope exploded in her chest like a sunrise. Someone was looking for her. Someone had noticed she was gone. Margaret. Probably Margaret with her mother's intuition and her endless worry. Or Rachel, who would have checked Emma's room before bed, who would have raised the alarm the moment she found it empty. They'd come for her. Emma tried to call out, but her throat was raw from the cold, her voice barely a croak. She struggled to her feet, legs shaking, and stumbled toward the cave entrance. Shadow was there in an instant. He blocked her path, not aggressively, but firmly, his massive body a wall between Emma and the outside world. A low whine escaped his throat. "Shadow, move." Emma's voice cracked. "They're here to help. I have to." But Shadow didn't move. His ears were pricked forward, his single eye fixed on something beyond the cave entrance. Every muscle in his body had gone rigid. Emma heard it then, not just voices. Footsteps, heavy, multiple. And beneath the rhythmic thrum of the helicopter, another sound. The metallic click of rifles being loaded. Emma's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the cave wall, peering around Shadow's shoulder. Through the gray morning light, filtering through the trees, she could see figures approaching. 5, no. 6 of them. All men, all armed. At the front, a familiar silhouette. Broad shoulders, blonde hair catching the weak sunlight. A stride that carried the arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Kyle. His voice drifted into the cave, casual and cold. "Found the den. Must be at least half a dozen wolves inside." A pause. A laugh that made Emma's stomach turn. "Shoot everything that moves. If you find the girl's body, don't leave any traces. Make it look like the wolves did their job." The men spread out, forming a perimeter around the cave entrance. One of them Brett. Emma realized with sick certainty chambered around. What if she's still alive? Kyle's answer came without hesitation. "Then make sure she isn't." Everything happened at once. Kyle raised his hand, signaling the hunters to advance. Brett moved to the left flank. Rifle raised. 2 others circled toward the right, cutting off escape routes that didn't exist. Emma's mind raced. Bound hands. No weapon. 6 armed men. One way out. She was going to die here. For real this time. Shadow pressed closer to her, a growl building deep in his chest. Around them, the pack rose, hackles raised, teeth bared, ancient instincts screaming danger. But they were wolves, not soldiers. Rifles against fangs. The math was simple and brutal. "Shadow," Emma whispered. "Don't. They'll kill you." The Alpha ignored her. He took a step toward the cave entrance, placing himself directly in the line of fire. Kyle appeared at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the gray morning light. His rifle swept the interior, passing over the wolves, landing on Emma. He froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Kyle's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like fear. "You're alive." His voice was flat. "That's not possible. Sorry to disappoint." Kyle's jaw tightened. His finger moved toward the trigger. "Wait." Brett's voice, nervous and high. "Kyle, there are witnesses. The other guys, they're not part of this. They think we're just hunting wolves. Then we make sure there's nothing left to witness." He raised the rifle, and then sirens. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. The helicopter's sound grew deafening. no longer distant but directly overhead. Voices erupted from multiple directions, shouting commands, calling Emma's name. Kyle spun around. "What the?" A figure burst through the underbrush. Rachel. Her face streaked with tears and dirt, pointing directly at her brother. He's there, he took her, he tried to kill her. Behind her came Sheriff Daniel Brooks, a weathered man in his 60s with a face carved from decades of Montana winters. His hand rested on his holstered weapon, his eyes taking in the scene with the calm assessment of someone who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. More deputies emerged from the trees. The hunters lowered their rifles immediately, confusion written across their faces. They hadn't signed up for this. "Kyle Harrison." Sheriff Brooks' voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Step away from the cave. Hands where I can see them." Kyle didn't move. His rifle was still raised, still pointed toward Emma. "This isn't what it looks like." His voice had shifted smooth now, persuasive, the voice of someone used to talking his way out of trouble. "I was trying to save her. I tracked the wolves here. She was in danger. He's lying." Rachel screamed. "I found the map in his room. He planned this. Brett told me everything when I confronted him." "Shut up." Kyle whirled on his sister. "You don't know what you're talking about. You never know anything. You stupid." "That's enough." Sheriff Brooks stepped forward, his hand now gripping his weapon. "Son, I'm going to ask you one more time. Put the rifle down." The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. Then Kyle laughed, a short, ugly sound. He lowered the rifle, let it drop to the ground. "Fine, arrest me. But this won't stick. My father will have me out within the hour." Sheriff Brooks nodded to his deputies. Two of them moved forward, securing Kyle's hands behind his back. Brett was already being led away, his face pale and sweating, words tumbling out of him in a desperate flood. "I didn't want to do it. Kyle made me. I told him it was crazy. He said the wolves would do the work. I have the video. It's all on my dash cam." Emma watched from the cave entrance as Kyle was dragged past her. His eyes met hers, cold, furious, unrepentant. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." Then he was gone, shoved into the back of a patrol car. The next hours blurred together. Paramedics, questions. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the drive to the hospital. Margaret's face crumpled with relief and horror. Her arms pulling Emma into an embrace that seemed designed to never let go. "I'm so sorry," Margaret kept saying. "I'm so sorry. Sweetheart. I should have known. I should have seen." Rachel held Emma's hand during the examination. Her grip was fierce, almost painful. "I found the map at 4 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, something felt wrong. And when I saw it, when I realized what he was planning..." Her voice broke. "I called the sheriff immediately. I should have checked sooner. I should have... You saved my life." Emma's voice was hoarse, barely functional. "That's enough." But even as she said it, something nagged at her. A detail that didn't fit. Walter. He'd been at the hospital when she arrived. Standing in the corner of the emergency room, face ashen, hands trembling. Margaret had run to Emma the moment the doors opened. Rachel had been steps behind. Walter hadn't moved. He'd stood there, watching. And when Emma's eyes had found his across the room, he'd looked away, not surprised, not relieved. Guilty. The realization crept through Emma like poison. Sheriff Brooks arrived at her hospital room around 9 in the morning. His face was grave, the lines around his eyes deeper than they'd been hours ago. Emma, I need to ask you some questions about Kyle Harrison. I already told the deputies everything. I know. He pulled a chair close to her bed, sat down heavily. But some new information has come to light. During his initial interrogation, Kyle made a statement. I need to verify it with you. Emma's stomach tightened. What kind of statement? Sheriff Brooks hesitated. In that pause, Emma saw something she hadn't expected. Pity. Kyle claims he didn't act alone in planning this. He says someone else knew about his intentions, knew and did nothing to stop him. The room went very quiet. He's lying. Margaret's voice, sharp with desperation. He's trying to spread blame to Mrs. Harrison. Sheriff Brooks held up a hand. Please. He turned back to Emma. Kyle says his father knew. Says Walter Harrison was fully aware of the plan to abandon you in that wolf den, and that Walter chose to remain silent. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emma looked at Margaret, whose face had gone white, at Rachel, whose hand had tightened painfully around Emma's fingers, and then at the doorway, where Walter Harrison stood frozen, a man who just watched his world collapse. That's insane, Margaret breathed. Walter would never. He loves Emma. Margaret. Walter's voice was barely audible. Broken. Don't. Every head turned toward him. Emma watched as Walter's shoulders crumbled. As 20 years of secrets caved in on themselves. As the man who taught her to drive, who'd left books on her nightstand, who'd called her kiddo, and made her believe she finally had a father, as that man dissolved into something unrecognizable. I knew. The words scraped out of him like rust. Kyle told me 3 days ago. He told me what he was planning, and I didn't stop him. Margaret made a sound like a wounded animal. Why? Rachel's voice cracked. Dad, why? Walter's eyes were fixed on the floor. Because 20 years ago, I killed someone. A drunk driving accident, a woman on a country road. I panicked. I fled. I buried the secret so deep, I almost convinced myself it never happened. His voice shattered. Kyle found out. I don't know how, but he found out. And he said if I told anyone about his plan, if I tried to stop him, he'd go to the police with everything. Silence. Emma stared at the man who had pretended to be her father. The man who had welcomed her into his home. Sat across from her at dinner. Watched her heal from a lifetime of trauma, all while knowing his son was planning her murder. All while choosing his secret over her life. She waited for the rage, the screaming, the tears. None came. There was only a vast, cold emptiness, the familiar numbness of betrayal. She'd felt it so many times before each foster home, each broken promise, each adult who'd looked at her and seen something disposable. She should have known. She should have always known. Emma. Walter took a step toward her. Please. I never wanted. I thought maybe Kyle wouldn't go through with it. I thought, get out. Her voice was flat. Dead. Walter flinched as if she'd struck him. Sheriff Brooks rose from his chair. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to need you to come with me. You're being detained as an accessory to attempted murder. As the deputies led Walter away, Kyle's voice echoed from somewhere down the hall, laughing. Hey, Emma, he shouted. Ask about the wolf. Ask about the old one. The one I kept in the barn for 5 years. Emma's blood turned to ice. What is he talking about? Sheriff Brooks frowned. What wolf? But Emma was already moving, ripping the IV from her arm, pushing past Margaret's reaching hands. Emma, wait. She didn't wait. Because she knew. The mother wolf, Shadow's mother, the creature who had saved her life 12 years ago. She wasn't dead. She was at the Harrison farm, and she'd been there all along. Emma ran. Through the hospital corridors, past startled nurses, out the emergency exit into the pale morning light. Her bare feet slapped against cold asphalt, the hospital gown flapping behind her. But she didn't care. Couldn't care. Rachel caught up with her in the parking lot, keys already in hand. I'll drive. Neither of them spoke during the 15-minute journey to the Harrison farm. Emma sat rigid in the passenger seat, hands clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. Her mind kept circling the same impossible thought. 5 years. Kyle had kept her for 5 years. The farm looked different in daylight, peaceful, even. The white farmhouse with its wraparound porch. The red barn where Emma had learned to care for horses. The rolling fields stretching toward the distant mountains. All of it a lie. A painted backdrop hiding something monstrous. The old equipment shed. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. Behind the barn, Kyle always kept it locked, said he stored hunting supplies there. Emma was out of the car before it fully stopped. She crossed the yard at a dead sprint, ignoring Rachel's calls to wait. Past the barn, past the chicken coop, to the weathered gray shed that squatted at the edge of the property like a forgotten secret. The padlock was heavy, industrial. Emma grabbed a rock from the ground and swung. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock held. She swung again, screaming with the effort. And on the 5th strike, something gave. The door creaked open. The smell hit her first. Blood. Feces. Decay. A stench so thick and foul that Emma's stomach heaved. She doubled over, gagging, tears streaming down her face from the assault on her senses. But she didn't stop. She stepped inside. The shed was dark, the only light filtering through gaps in the rotting wooden walls. As Emma's eyes adjusted, shapes emerged from the shadows. Chains bolted to the floor, bowls crusted with old food. Dark stains splattered across the concrete. And in the corner, a cage. Emma's legs stopped working. The cage was barely 4 feet wide. Rusted bars, a floor covered in filth, and inside a wolf, or what was left of one. The creature lay motionless, ribs jutting like knife blades beneath matted fur. Her coat once silver gray. Emma knew. Once beautiful was now a patchwork of scars, bald patches, and open wounds. One eye was gone completely, the socket a mess of old scar tissue. The other was clouded, unfocused, staring at nothing. Scratch marks covered every surface of the cage. Thousands of them. Years of desperate clawing, of trying to escape, of slowly going mad in the darkness. Emma fell to her knees. No. The word came out broken. No, no, no. She crawled toward the cage, hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the bars. The wolf didn't react, didn't move. For a terrible moment, Emma thought she was dead. Then she saw it, the faint rise and fall of the wolf's chest. Shallow, labored. But there, I'm here. Emma pressed her face against the bars, tears flowing freely. I'm here. I came back. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. The wolf's remaining eyes shifted. Slowly. Painfully. Her head turned toward the sound of Emma's voice. Recognition. Even after 12 years. Even after 5 years of torture. Even through the haze of pain and starvation and despair. She knew. A sound escaped the wolf's throat. Not a growl, not a whimper. Something deeper. Something that transcended species and language and time. The sound of a mother finding her lost child. Emma sobbed. She tore at the cage door, breaking her nails, bloodying her fingers. The lock was newer than the one on the shed, stronger. It wouldn't budge. Rachel! Emma screamed. Bolt cutters, anything. Footsteps behind her. Rachel appeared in the doorway, took one look at the cage, and vomited. But she recovered quickly, disappeared, returned moments later with heavy-duty cutters from the barn. The lock gave way with a screech of metal. Emma flung the door open and crawled inside. She gathered the wolf's head into her lap, so light, so terribly light, and bent over her, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. The wolf's tongue emerged, dry and cracked. She licked Emma's hand once, twice. Then her eye closed. Don't. Emma's voice shattered. Don't you dare. You saved me. You saved me and I left you and I didn't know. I didn't know. The wolf's breathing grew shallower. Rachel was on the phone, her voice frantic and distant. Sirens approached. People arrived. Voices surrounded Emma, concerned, horrified, asking questions she couldn't process. She didn't move. She stayed curled around the wolf who had saved her life, holding her as the world collapsed. A man's voice cut through the chaos. Let me through. I'm a veterinarian. Dr. Thomas Reed was tall, graying at the temples, with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that suggested he'd seen too much suffering in his career. He knelt beside Emma, his expression professional, clinical. Then he saw the wolf. The clinical mask cracked. Jesus Christ. He whispered it like a prayer. How long has she been here? 5 years. Emma's voice was hollow. Maybe more. Dr. Reed's hands moved over the wolf with practiced efficiency. Checking pulse, examining wounds, assessing damage. With each passing second, his expression grew grimmer. Severe malnutrition, multiple infections, internal bleeding old and new. He sat back on his heels, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. She needs surgery, immediately. But even then, save her. Emma gripped his arm. Please, you have to save her. Miss Collins. His voice was gentle but firm. This animal has been through catastrophic trauma. Even with immediate intervention, her chances are... I don't care about chances. I care about trying. Dermadku. Reed studied her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. The surgery she needs, it's extensive. Specialized. The facility. The equipment. The medications. He hesitated. It would cost approximately $15,000. Minimum, and I'd need payment up front. The clinic can't absorb that kind of expense. $15,000. Emma almost laughed. She had $47,000 in student debt. 3 part-time jobs that barely covered her food and gas. A bank account that rarely climbed above double digits. She had nothing. I'll pay. Margaret's voice from somewhere behind her. Whatever it costs, I'll... You can't. Rachel's response was quiet, devastated. The accounts are frozen. Everything's tied to Dad. And with the arrest, Margaret made a sound like something breaking. Emma looked down at the wolf in her lap, at the creature who had found a starving, beaten child in the forest and chosen to save her, who had shared her food, her warmth, her den, who had given Emma the only taste of unconditional love she'd ever known. 5 years. 5 years this wolf had suffered while Emma lived in the same house as her captor, ate dinner with him, watched TV with him, let herself believe she was finally safe. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing her chest. I can try to raise the money. Emma's voice was barely audible. I can sell things, my car, my... But even as she said it, she knew. There wasn't enough time. There wasn't enough anything. She was going to lose her. Again. I'm sorry. The words scraped out of her, directed at the wolf, at herself, at the universe that had never once given her a fair chance. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry. The wolf's eye opened, fixed on Emma's face. And despite everything, the pain, the starvation, the years of darkness, something like peace settled over her features. She wasn't afraid. She was just glad to see Emma again. That broke something in Emma that she didn't know she had left to break. She buried her face in the wolf's fur and wept. She wept for the 8-year-old girl who had found love in a cave, for the 20-year-old woman who kept searching for it in all the wrong places, for the mother who had chosen a human child over her own safety, for all the years lost, all the suffering endured, all the terrible, unfair cruelty of a world that seemed designed to destroy anything good. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't notice the shadow falling across the shed doorway. That's her. Isn't it? A woman's voice, old but steady, carrying something that sounded almost like recognition. The wolf who saved you all those years ago. Emma looked up. An elderly woman stood silhouetted against the light. 78, maybe 80. White hair pulled back in a simple braid. A face weathered by time, but softened by something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Who are you? The woman stepped closer, her eyes blue, bright, impossible, familiar, moved from Emma to the wolf and back again. My name is Grace Mitchell. Her voice trembled. And I've been looking for you for 20 years. Emma. She knelt down, her aged knees protesting, until she was eye level with Emma. I was there, you know, in the forest, 12 years ago. I was the one who found you in that cave. A tear traced down her weathered cheek. I wanted to take you home then, but they wouldn't let me. Said I had no legal claim. Emma's heart stopped. I don't understand. Grace reached out, her weathered hand cupping Emma's face with a tenderness that felt ancient and new all at once. Your mother's name was Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. Her voice broke. She was my daughter. The world tilted. She didn't abandon you. Emma. She never wanted to let you go. Grace's tears fell freely now. And I am so sorry it took me this long to find you. But I'm here now. She pulled something from her coat pocket. A photograph, yellowed with age. A young woman with Emma's eyes. Emma's hair. Emma's smile holding a newborn baby, looking down at her with an expression of pure, devastating love. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. Grace's voice shattered. And so do I. Emma stared at the photograph, at the face she'd never seen before, at the truth she'd spent 20 years believing didn't exist. And somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the guilt, beneath 20 years of believing she was unlovable, something cracked open. There's more. Grace's grip tightened on Emma's hand. About your mother. About why she left you. About the woman who forced her to do it. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. What woman? Grace's expression hardened into something cold and ancient. Her name is Victoria Harrison, Kyle's mother. The words fell like stones. And 20 years ago, she murdered my daughter. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning for 20 years. Victoria Harrison, Kyle's mother, murderer. Emma's mind reeled. She looked at Grace, her grandmother. She had a grandmother and saw the weight of 2 decades of grief carved into every line of her face. Tell me everything. Grace nodded slowly. She settled onto the dirty floor of the shed, uncaring of the filth, her eyes distant with memory. Your mother was 19 when she had you. Too young, everyone said. But Sarah, Grace's voice caught. Sarah never saw it that way. You were her miracle, her reason. She pulled a worn envelope from her coat. The paper was yellowed, the edges soft from years of handling. She wrote this the night before she died. Asked me to give it to you when you were old enough to understand. Emma's hands trembled as she took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was faded but legible. For my Emma, my heart. Sarah was working as a waitress in Bozeman when she met Walter Harrison. Grace's jaw tightened. He was charming, wealthy, married. But that didn't stop him. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Walter is my... No. Grace cut her off firmly. He's nothing to you. What he did, what they all did. She took a breath, steadying herself. Walter had an affair with Sarah. When she got pregnant, she thought he might leave his wife, that he might choose her, choose you. The wolf stirred weakly in Emma's lap. She stroked the matted fur automatically, her mind struggling to process. But Victoria found out. And Victoria, she wasn't the kind of woman who let things go. Grace's eyes hardened. She came to Sarah with an offer. $20,000 to disappear, to give you up for adoption and never contact Walter again. When Sarah refused, Grace's voice fractured. Victoria showed her what she was capable of. What do you mean? She had connections, dangerous ones. She threatened to have Sarah killed. Threatened to have you killed. She made it very clear that if Sarah didn't comply, neither of you would survive the month. Emma thought of the woman she'd glimpsed in photographs around the Harrison house. Elegant, composed, smiling, monster. Sarah made an impossible choice. Tears streamed down Grace's weathered cheeks. She gave you up, put you in the foster system where Victoria couldn't easily track you. She thought we both thought that you'd be safe, that you'd be adopted by a good family, that you'd have a chance. The irony was suffocating. 12 foster homes, beatings, neglect, cigarette burns, all because Sarah had been trying to protect her. What happened to her? Grace was silent for a long moment. 10 years ago, Sarah tried to find you. She'd spent years saving money, building a case, gathering evidence against Victoria. She thought if she could expose what Victoria had done, the threats, the coercion, she could get you back legally, safely. But Victoria found out. It wasn't a question. Grace nodded. Car accident. That's what the police called it. Single vehicle, late at night. On a mountain road Sarah had driven 100 times. Her voice turned to ice. Sarah didn't drink. Sarah didn't speed. Sarah didn't drive off cliffs. You tried to tell someone. I tried to tell everyone. Police, lawyers, journalists. But Victoria had money, influence, alibis for every suspicious moment. And I was just a grieving old woman making wild accusations. Grace reached out, gripping Emma's hand. So I waited. I watched. I moved to Montana to be close to where I'd last seen you in that cave with the wolves. I spent 12 years tracking your movements through the foster system. 12 years being blocked by Victoria's lawyers every time I tried to make contact. 12 years waiting for the moment I could finally reach you. Emma looked down at the dying wolf in her lap. At the grandmother she'd never known. At the letter from the mother who had loved her, after all. 20 years. So much lost. So much stolen. But not everything. I have $20,000. Grace's voice strengthened. Everything I've saved. It was meant to be yours anyway, your inheritance, your future. But right now. She looked at the wolf. Right now. I think your mother would want it used for this. Emma's throat closed. I can't take. You're not taking. You're receiving. Grace squeezed her hand. That's what family does. We give. We receive. We carry each other. Family. The word felt foreign on Emma's tongue. But looking at Grace, at this woman who had spent 2 decades fighting for a granddaughter she'd never met, Emma felt something shift in her chest. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Dr. Reed. Emma's voice came out stronger than she expected. Do it. Whatever she needs. Save her. Reed had been standing at the edge of the shed, watching silently. He nodded once, then moved into action. The next hours blurred into controlled chaos. An emergency veterinary ambulance arrived. The wolf was transferred onto a stretcher with agonizing care. Emma refused to leave her side. At the clinic, Dr. Reed assembled his team with military efficiency. Pre-op assessments, IV fluids, stabilization protocols. Through the window of the surgical suite, Emma watched them work, masked figures moving around the table where the wolf lay, fighting for a life that had almost been extinguished. Margaret and Rachel arrived at 4 o'clock. Margaret's eyes were swollen from crying, her usual composure shattered. She approached Emma hesitantly, as if afraid of being turned away. I didn't know. Her voice broke. About any of it. Walter, Victoria, your mother, I swear to you. Emma. I didn't know. Emma looked at the woman who had braided her hair, who had taught her to make pie, who had held her through nightmares without asking questions. Margaret wasn't her enemy. Margaret was another victim. I know. She let Margaret embrace her. Let Rachel join them. 4 women, 3 generations of pain, holding each other in a veterinary waiting room while surgeons fought to save a wolf. Grace sat apart, reading Sarah's letter silently, tears tracking down her face. At 5:30, Dr. Reed emerged from surgery. Everyone stood. His face was exhausted, but was that hope? She's alive. He pulled off his surgical cap. I won't lie, she's fragile. The internal damage was extensive, but she's a fighter. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Whatever kept her going these past 5 years, it wasn't ready to let go. Emma's knees buckled. Rachel caught her. "Can I see her?" "She's sedated, but yes, briefly." The wolf lay on a clean white table. IVs trailing from her foreleg, monitors beeping steadily. She looked smaller somehow. Fragile. But her chest rose and fell with rhythmic certainty. Emma leaned close. "You made it," she whispered. "You stayed alive for 12 years waiting for me to come back. I'm not going anywhere now. I promise." The wolf's remaining eye opened slightly, fixed on Emma's face. Her tail moved. Once. Weakly. But it moved. Emma smiled through her tears. For the first time in 20 years, something broken inside her began to mend. Then Sheriff Brooks burst through the clinic doors. His face was grim. "Wrong. We have a problem?" Emma straightened. "What kind of problem?" "Kyle made bail. Some high-powered attorney flew in from Seattle, got a judge to sign off an hour ago." Brooks ran a hand over his face. "But that's not the worst part." "What's the worst part?" "The attorney. I ran her name." He looked at Emma with something close to pity. "Victoria Harrison landed in Montana 2 hours ago. She's Kyle's mother, and she's been paying his legal fees for years. She's also the woman who killed my mother." Brooks blinked. "You know, I know. Then you should also know this." His voice dropped. "Victoria filed an emergency motion 30 minutes ago. She's claiming the wolf is property of the Harrison estate. She's demanding it be released into her custody for..." He checked his notes. "Humane euthanization." The room went cold. "She can't do that." Rachel's voice pitched high. "That's insane. She can't just..." "She has lawyers, money, influence." Brooks shook his head. "The motion is being heard in 2 hours, and unless someone can prove that Wolf doesn't belong to the Harrisons..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Grace rose from her chair, her face transformed into something ancient and terrible. "I've waited 20 years for this." Her voice was iron. "That woman took my daughter. She is not taking my granddaughter's wolf. How do we stop her?" Grace smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Victoria thinks she's the only one who kept secrets all these years." She reached into her coat and withdrew a thick manila folder. "She's wrong." Before anyone could respond, the clinic doors swung open again, and Victoria Harrison walked in. She was exactly what Emma had imagined, and worse. 60 years old, but preserved like a museum piece. Designer suit, perfect makeup, eyes like chips of blue ice. Those eyes swept the room, dismissed Margaret, dismissed Rachel, and landed on Emma with a predator's focus. "So," Victoria's smile was porcelain and poison, "you must be Sarah's daughter." She stepped closer. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." Victoria Harrison moved through the veterinary clinic like she owned it. Perhaps, in some way. She believed she did. "I'll make this simple." Her voice was cultured, controlled. "The wolf is Harrison property. It was captured on Harrison land, housed in Harrison facilities. My legal team has already filed the paperwork. This ends now." Emma stepped between Victoria and the surgical suite door. "That wolf isn't property. She's a living being who was tortured by your son for 5 years. Victoria's smile didn't waver. "My son made poor choices. That's being addressed. but the animal remains an asset of the estate, and I have every legal right to. You have no rights here. Grace's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stepped forward, the manila folder clutched in her weathered hands. 20 years of grief had hardened into something unbreakable. Victoria, it's been a long time. For the first time, something flickered behind Victoria's mask. Recognition, and beneath it, fear. Grace Mitchell. The name came out flat. I heard you'd crawled off somewhere to die. Sorry to disappoint. The two women faced each other, predator and survivor. 20 years of hatred crystallized in the space between them. You killed my daughter. Grace's voice didn't tremble. You threatened her, terrorized her. And when she tried to fight back, you murdered her and made it look like an accident. Careful, Grace. Victoria's tone sharpened. Slander is actionable, and unlike you, I can afford lawyers. Can you afford prison? Grace opened the manila folder. 20 years ago, you hired a man named Dennis Cartwright to tamper with Sarah's brakes. You paid him $15,000 through a shell company registered in Nevada. She pulled out a document. This is the wire transfer receipt. The FBI has authenticated it. Victoria's face went pale. You also made 3 phone calls to Cartwright in the week before Sarah's death. The phone records were sealed as part of an unrelated investigation, but Grace smiled grimly. I have friends who know how to unseal things. She pulled out another sheet. And this is Dennis Cartwright's deathbed confession, recorded 6 months ago when pancreatic cancer finally caught up with him. He names you specifically, describes the arrangement in detail, even mentions the little coffee shop in Helena where you handed him the cash. Sheriff Brooks stepped forward, his hand resting on his weapon. Mrs. Harrison, I'm going to need you to come with me. Victoria's composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for exits, for allies, for any way out of the trap closing around her. This is absurd. These documents are fabricated. My attorneys will... Your attorneys can meet us at the station. Brooks nodded to his deputies. Victoria Harrison, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Mitchell. You have the right to remain silent. The deputies moved forward, and that's when everything went wrong. Victoria's hand plunged into her designer purse. Metal glinted under the fluorescent lights. Nobody move. The gun was small, but deadly, a pearl-handled revolver that looked almost decorative, until you noticed her finger on the trigger. Everyone froze. You think I've spent 20 years building my empire just to let some backwoods sheriff and a senile old woman tear it down? Victoria's mask had shattered completely. Beneath it was something feral, desperate, capable of anything. I didn't survive this long by being careless. She swung the gun toward Emma. You, Sarah's little bastard. You should have died in that foster system like you were supposed to. Would have saved everyone so much trouble. Emma didn't flinch, didn't move. 20 years of survival had taught her to recognize true danger. And this was it. Put the gun down, Victoria. Sheriff Brooks' hand hovered over his holster. This only ends one way. Does it? Victoria laughed a brittle, breaking sound. I have money in 6 countries. Private planes on standby. All I need is a head start. She grabbed Emma by the arm, jamming the gun against her temple. Move, and I kill her. Anyone follows me, I kill her. I disappear. And in 6 months, I kill her anyway. Do we understand each other? Nobody moved. Victoria began backing toward the exit, dragging Emma with her. The gun barrel was cold against Emma's skin. Her heart hammered, but her mind was strangely clear. This was how it ended. Not with wolves, but with the monster who had orchestrated everything from the beginning. They were almost to the door when it burst open. Kyle Harrison stood in the entrance, wild-eyed and bleeding from a gash on his forehead. He must have fought his way past the deputy left guarding him. And he had a rifle. "Mother." His voice was unhinged. "I heard the scanner. Heard they were arresting you." "Kyle." Victoria's gun stayed pressed to Emma's head, but her voice softened. "Perfect timing, sweetheart. Help Mommy clean up this mess." Kyle raised his rifle, but he wasn't pointing it at the sheriff. Wasn't pointing it at Grace. He was pointing it at Victoria. "Clean up." His laugh was ragged. "Like you cleaned up my whole life. Like you cleaned up Dad's affair. Like you cleaned me up every time I became inconvenient." Victoria's grip on Emma tightened. "What are you talking about?" "I talked to Dad. After they arrested him." Kyle's hands shook, but the rifle stayed level. "He told me everything. How you manipulated him into the affair with Sarah. How you used it to control him for 20 years. How you've been pulling my strings since I was 5 years old, turning me into this." His voice cracked. "I'm a monster, Mother, and you made me." "Kyle, sweetheart, put the gun down. We can discuss this later, after what? After you kill another innocent person? After you disappear and leave me to rot in prison?" Kyle's eyes were wet. "You never loved me. You never loved anyone. We were all just pieces on your chessboard." "That's not true. Then why did you leave? When I was 5, why did you walk out and not come back for 15 years? His voice rose to a scream. "Why did you only show up when Dad had money worth taking?" Victoria's mask flickered. For a moment, just a moment, something human surfaced. Then it vanished. "Because you were weak, just like your father, just like everyone in this pathetic family." Her voice turned cruel. "I came back because the ranch is worth $2 million, and I needed a puppet to help me take it. That's all you ever were. Kyle. A useful puppet." Kyle made a sound like a wounded animal. His finger tightened on the trigger. Emma moved. She threw her elbow back into Victoria's ribs, breaking free of her grip. Victoria's gun discharged the bullet, shattering a window. Kyle fired at the same moment, and something massive and gray launched through the broken window. Shadow. The alpha wolf slammed into Kyle with the force of a freight train, knocking him sideways. The rifle shot went wild, punching into the ceiling. But Shadow wasn't finished. He stood over Kyle, pinning him to the ground, teeth bared inches from his throat. A growl rumbled from his chest, deep, ancient, promising death. Victoria raised her gun toward the wolf. Emma screamed. Another shot rang out. Victoria crumpled, clutching her shoulder, the revolver clattering to the floor. Behind her stood Walter Harrison, a smoking pistol in his shaking hands. He was supposed to be in custody. He must have escaped when Kyle did. "I'm sorry." Walter's voice was destroyed. "For everything. For Sarah. For Emma. For all of it." He looked at his son, pinned beneath the wolf. Looked at the woman he'd let control him for 20 years. Looked at the chaos his cowardice had created. This is my fault, all of it. He dropped the gun and held out his hands to Sheriff Brooks. I'll testify. Against Kyle, against Victoria. I'll tell them everything, the accident 20 years ago, Sarah's murder, all of it. Tears streamed down his face. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can stop it from getting worse. Deputies swarmed in. Victoria was handcuffed, screaming threats that no one listened to. Kyle was pulled out from under Shadow, sobbing, broken in ways that went beyond a physical. Emma stood in the chaos, breathing hard. Shadow limped to her side. His old wounds had reopened, blood matted his silver fur, dripping onto the clinic floor. Shadow. Emma dropped to her knees. No, you're hurt. You can't. The wolf pressed his head against her chest. His breathing was labored. Wrong. Dr. Reed pushed through the crowd, took one look at Shadow, and his face went white. He's bleeding internally. The impact must have ruptured something. He was already shouting for his team. Get him on the table, now. They lifted Shadow onto a stretcher. Emma tried to follow, but Rachel held her back. Let them work. Through the surgical window, Emma watched them cut into Shadow, watched the monitors spike and drop, watched Dr. Reed's team fight for the life of the wolf who had saved hers. Twice now. He'd saved her twice. The surgery stretched into hours. Night fell outside. Grace brought Emma coffee she couldn't drink. Margaret held her hand. Rachel prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. At 11 o'clock, Destars, Reed emerged. His surgical gown was soaked with blood. His face was impossible to read. Emma stood. He's alive, Dr. Reed's voice was hoarse. Barely. The next 24 hours will determine everything. Emma's legs gave out. Grace caught her. Can I see him? 5 minutes. He needs rest. Shadow lay on the surgical table, surrounded by monitors and tubes. His breathing was shallow but steady. When Emma approached, his eye opened. She knelt beside him. You stupid, brave, impossible wolf. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to save me again. Shadow's tail twitched. Once, Emma leaned her forehead against his. Don't you dare die on me. We just found each other again. Outside. Victoria was being loaded into a police car. Kyle was strapped to a stretcher, sedated and silent. Walter sat in the back of an ambulance, giving his statement. But Emma didn't see any of it. She saw only Shadow, only the wolf who had chosen her again and again, across 12 impossible years. I love you, she whispered. I don't know if wolves understand that, but I do. I love you. Shadow's eye closed. His heartbeat on the monitor stayed steady. And somewhere in the Montana night, a single howl rose from the wilderness, long and mournful and full of something that sounded almost like prayer. The rest of Shadow's pack, calling their alpha home. Shadow survived. For 3 days. Emma didn't leave the clinic. She slept in a chair beside his recovery kennel, waking every few hours to check his breathing, to whisper reassurances, to simply remind herself that he was still there. On the 4th day, he stood. It was shaky, his legs trembled, and Dr. Reed hovered nervously, but Shadow rose on his own power and pressed his nose against Emma's palm. Stubborn creature, Dr. Reed muttered, but he was smiling. Never seen anything like it. By all medical logic, he should be dead. Emma scratched behind Shadow's ear. He had reasons to live. 1 week after the incident, justice began its slow grind. Victoria Harrison was denied bail. The evidence Grace had gathered, combined with Walter's testimony, painted an inescapable picture of calculated murder and decades of manipulation. The prosecutor charged her with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. She sat in her cell and refused to speak to anyone. Kyle received a different fate. The psychiatric evaluation revealed years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and psychological conditioning by his mother. He was broken, not excused, but broken. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in a psychiatric facility, with the possibility of parole after 10. Emma didn't attend his sentencing. She had no desire to see him again. But Rachel went, and when she returned, her eyes were red. He cried, Rachel said quietly. When they led him away, he looked at me and said he was sorry. I don't know if I believe him, but I think he meant it. Walter's case was complicated. His testimony against Victoria had been instrumental, but he'd also concealed a hit-and-run for 20 years and had known about Kyle's plan to kill Emma. In the end, he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and accessory to attempted murder. The judge gave him 8 years, with eligibility for parole in 5, before they took him away. Emma visited him in the county jail. He looked older, smaller. The man who had taught her to drive seemed to have aged decades in days. I don't expect forgiveness. His voice was hollow. I don't deserve it. Emma studied him through the glass partition. The man who had betrayed her. The man who had also, in the end, saved her life. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said finally. Maybe I never will be. But I understand that people are complicated. That fear makes us do terrible things. She stood to leave. I hope you find peace. Walter, I hope you become someone worth forgiving. She didn't look back. 1 year later, the Harrison Ranch had a new name. Collins Mitchell Farm. The sign read, Emma had insisted. Margaret stayed on as manager, throwing herself into the work with a determination that seemed like penance. Rachel finished her degree in veterinary science, inspired by Dr. Reed's work-saving Shadow and his mother. Grace moved into the farmhouse's guest room. She was 80 now, her steps slower, but her eyes remained sharp. Every Sunday, she and Emma would sit on the porch and she would tell stories about Sarah, her laugh, her dreams, the way she'd sung lullabies to her belly when she was pregnant. She would be so proud of you, Grace said one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. So proud of the woman you've become. Emma leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder. I wish I could have known her. You do know her. Grace touched Emma's chest. She's right here. Always has been. Shadow and his mother recovered together. Dr. Reed arranged for them to be housed at a wildlife sanctuary near Yellowstone, a sprawling preserve where injured wolves could live out their days in peace. Emma visited every week, then every few days. Then, when she got the job, every single day. The Yellowstone Wolf Project hired her as a research assistant. Her thesis, Interspecies Bonding, a case study in wolf-human recognition memory, had attracted national attention. Scientists were fascinated by Shadow's behavior, by the 12-year bond that had defied everything they thought they knew about wild animals. Emma didn't care about the science. She cared about the wolf who waited at the fence every morning, tail wagging, as if he'd spent his whole life waiting for her to come home. Shadow's mother passed peacefully in the spring, 2 years after her rescue. She died in the sunshine, with Shadow on one side and Emma on the other. Her last breath was a soft exhale, almost content. They buried her on the hill overlooking the sanctuary. Emma planted wildflowers on the grave. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for teaching your son to love." Shadow sat beside the grave for 3 days. On the 4th, he rose, pressed his nose to the earth one final time, and walked back to Emma. Together. They continued. 5 years later, Emma returned to the hill with someone new. The girl was 5 years old, with tangled brown hair and enormous dark eyes that had seemed too much too young. Her name was Lily. She'd been in the foster system since birth. Emma had adopted her 6 months ago. "This is Mother's Hill," Emma explained, kneeling beside Lily. "A very special wolf is buried here. She saved my life once, a long time ago." Lily clutched Emma's hand. "Was she scary?" "No, sweetheart. She was brave and kind, and she loved me even though I wasn't her baby." A rustle in the grass. Shadow emerged from the tree line. He was old now, 15. Ancient for a wolf, his muzzle gray, his movements slow, but his eye was still bright, still knowing. Lily gasped and pressed closer to Emma. "It's okay," Emma smiled. "This is Shadow. He's family." Shadow approached slowly. He sniffed Lily's outstretched hand, her hair, her tear-stained cheeks. Then, with infinite gentleness, he licked her fingers. Lily giggled. "He tickles. He likes you." Shadow settled onto the grass beside them, his great head resting near Lily's knee. The little girl reached out tentatively and touched his fur. "Soft," she whispered, wonder replacing fear. Emma watched them, the wolf who had saved her. The child she had saved, and felt something she'd spent 20 years searching for. Wholeness. "Mama." Lily's voice was small. "Will Shadow be my family too?" Emma pulled her daughter close. "Yes, sweetheart. He will. We're all family now." Above them, the Montana sky stretched endless and blue. The wildflowers on Mother's Hill swayed in the breeze. And somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled, not in mourning this time, but in welcome. Emma closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. She was finally home. They told Emma she was unwanted, unlovable, destined to be forgotten. But a wolf remembered her for 12 years. Sometimes the ones who save us do not speak our language. Sometimes family is not blood. Sometimes the creatures this world calls wild have gentler hearts than the humans we trust. If this story touched something in you, I want to hear about it. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been saved by an animal? Has a dog, a cat, a horse, or any creature shown you love when humans could not? Have you ever felt like Emma, thrown away, abandoned, wondering if anyone would notice if you disappeared, or perhaps you are the wolf in someone else's story? The one who remembered, the one who stayed, the one who loved without condition when the world said that person was not worth loving. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who feels alone, someone who has forgotten that loyalty still exists in this world. Like this video if you believe that family is not about blood, it is about who refuses to leave. And follow for more stories that remind us what matters most, because everyone deserves to be remembered.